Welcome and thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis along with co-host Devin Dacona. Today we're going to be talking about something that I think a lot of people have on their mind, and that is education and its future. Well, we're talking about more of the higher learning type. Why is it that on the average of every 10 years, college tuition seems to go up by at least more than 50%? Now, most people are trying to figure out what is the cost of this education actually getting us this day and age. A lot of the rumors that seem to be circulating around is a college MBA, does that hold the same value that it did back in 1950, 1960, or even 1970? Most people would say not. They'd say just getting a high school GED seems to get us all the promise we'll ever need. But in the meantime, still we have young people going off to colleges, millions of dollars in student loans and debt, and still people out there pounding the pavement for those promised jobs that a higher learning education would get us. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is author of a wonderful book called Do It Yourself University, or simply titled DIYU. She's a staff writer for the Fast Company magazine. Also, the Village Voice had nominated her for a Pulitzer Prize for contributions on the feature series of Generation Debt, which became a book, by the way. And she has also written for the New York Times and has appeared on CNN and National Public Radio. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is our guest, Anya Kamenetz. We're going to be talking about what it is with Do It Yourself University. Anya, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thanks so much for having me.
What a powerful subject this is for having, to talk about, especially this day and age with so many students coming out of colleges, not just in debt, but not even working at the same time. What's going on here?
Well, we passed an important and sort of a troubling milestone earlier this year when the total volume of all outstanding student loans actually outpaced the total volume of credit card debt in this country. So, this is a really serious problem in the hundreds of billions of dollars. And as you mentioned in your intro, the cost of college is heading up actually more than any other good or service in the entire U.S. economy. So this is not a sustainable pattern. This is something where the immovable, post of cost is hitting the unstoppable rock of people's desire to get an education, and I think something has to give.
Mm-hmm. And now, Devin, you're a college student yourself, and you're going into your final year of college. What has been your experience here?
Well, college tuition is just out of control. Where I go to Lewis University, and it's about $30,000 a year. So, I remember my grandma telling me when she went to college, it wasn't as much. Anya, can you tell me, how college tuition costs got so out of control?
Sure. So really, this is something that it's very complicated, but it shows a lot of patterns of what's going on in our society. So, first of all, you have basic economics that education, like healthcare, requires intensive application of skilled labor, and therefore it's always going to rise faster than inflation. But then on top of that, what you have, very similar to healthcare, is you do not have a functioning market. So essentially, the desire to go to college is so important, and it's so central to really the American dream and participation in our economy that parents and families are willing to pay whatever the market will bear. And colleges really take advantage of that. They don't have any pressure going on them the other way to really cut costs in a way that is intelligent and efficient. And then finally, you have this third added pressure of student loans. And it's very similar to what happened recently with the mortgage crisis. When you have a huge availability of people to finance their educations rather than paying out of pocket, that's when the cost really gets out of control, because the pressure to actually rack up debt to pay for the school is something where the colleges have impunity then to continue to raise tuition, and they don't have to, again, trim their costs. And so all three of these factors are really pushing in together. Yeah.
Also, you kind of compared higher education to the real estate bubble and how that can be the next bubble to burst. Can you explain that a little more?
Sure. So college education, like home ownership, actually, both of them have been really sold to Americans as being the center of the American dream. And you can, again, it's not middle, you're not participating in middle class life unless you have these two things. And because of people's vast desire to get these things, we're then willing to go into unconscionable amounts of debt. And the question that we're not asking, that we also did not ask in the time of the madness of the housing market, was, what exactly is the value of this, and does everyone really need to own a home, or does everyone really need to get a college degree? And that's really the question I think that we need to ask now before we find ourselves in a lot of trouble.
And also, one of the things that stood out to me while reading your book is it said that colleges can increase their tuition just to look more prestigious on the U.S. News and World Report rankings. Can you describe a little more about that?
Sure. So, really what the problem is here is that college is a black box. Parents and students do not have a lot of good information about such things as the students' graduation rates, where they actually go after they graduate, the jobs that they're actually getting, or the quality of the learning that's going on in the classroom. None of that is really visible to people. And so we use these proxy measures. And in the U.S. News and World Report rankings, about 75% of the rankings are direct or proxy measures of spending per student. So there's a direct correlation between how much money a college spends per student and how good they look, how quality they look. So as long as we're equating quality with cost, it's very easy to see how a college will say, well, if I raise my tuition, I'm going to look better on those rankings.
That's interesting. What would you think are the main issues facing the higher education system today in the U.S.?
Well, we're talking about all of these. We're talking about the cost. We're talking about, again, access, which is directly related to cost. If something is that out of reach, that's why America has now fallen from 1st to 10th in the number of educated people, because the cost is simply too high and a lot of families are priced out. And then finally, the issue we just alluded to, which is the issue of quality. We don't really know what happens inside the classroom. We don't have a college equivalent of the SAT, and we don't know if what students are learning is relevant to their futures. And a lot of times students unfortunately come to graduation and find out that it wasn't relevant at all.
I think what's really interesting too, Anya, in your book is you talk about incentives or things that are implied, for instance, about the quality education. And this is something out of your book that I kind of found funny, to be honest with you. Colleges installed rock climbing walls, served organic food, and gave every student a free iPod. And you're thinking, these are supposed to be incentives to going to these colleges? What's going on there?
Well, again, it's interesting because I talk to the parents and I talk to the administrators, and it's really a vicious circle because I think obviously every family wants what's best for their kid. They want quality, and they don't really have good information as to what constitutes quality. And so what do you end up doing? You end up looking for outward indicators and these signs and things that you can see on a college tour, a campus tour, the kinds of amenities you're talking about. And that's what colleges end up going for because that's what parents and families are asking for. So, there's really a vicious cycle. And what's missing in this whole system is the sort of affordable quality, and there's so many other areas in our economy that America has been really innovative and able to come up with this idea of affordable quality, a quality that everyone can have, and that's really what's missing in our higher ed system.
Now, tell me, Anya, what motivated you to actually write this book? Was this a personal experience that you really had, or is it just kind of something that kind of came and you said, why when it comes every 4 years to re-electing a new president, education is put up there, but it's always about the cost rather than really the quality of what's really going on out there for what you're spending your money on?
Sure, absolutely. So, as I mentioned in my intro, my first book was called Generation Debt, and that was really all about the stories of young people and students who were dealing with the huge amounts of student loan debt. And originally, I really adopted sort of the classic liberal view, and I said, if we get more government funding on this, then we're going to have, crack the affordability problem. But as I started to make a deeper study of the issues involved in higher ed, and as I traveled around the country and saw, what higher education really looked like across the country, it's very, very different from the way the media portrays it. This is a nation of community colleges. This is a nation of career-oriented students who are in their 20s, who have families often to support. And I think that the discourse or the conversation around higher ed doesn't really reflect that reality. And beyond that, it doesn't reflect the truth that if you simply throw more money at the problem, you're not going to result with a more affordable higher education. You really need to look at the incentives and the way the system is set up.
One of the interesting tidbits I found while reading, too, is I kind of like the idea of personalized learning networks, but I would like to know, are there any risks or dangers in this model being irrelevant beyond the upper middle-class student?
Well, this is a really interesting question. So in my book, as you mentioned, I'm referring to new models of learning and new models that are more student-centered and that really put a lot more responsibility on people to try to find their own networks and paths. And the upside of this is really what's necessary for people to be able to succeed in today's economy. You know, ultimately, and I understand you're an intern right now, is that right?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, so internships are a really, really good example of this because you cannot get a job today without having those informal connections and that workplace experience. That's simply the way it's done, but that's not something that's part of our official, curriculum in many, many schools. I mean, some schools offer the ability to get credit for it, but they're not supervising or controlling what goes on there. And you know, this is an example of personalized learning. This is an example of you're going to go out there and make your own experience. And yes, it's more responsibility, but that's simply what's required of people if they want to compete.
And also, what are some solutions that would be on the horizon? And also, how can technology help improve teaching and learning?
Sure. So, this idea of personalized learning networks, it happens in experiential settings like in internships, but it's also very much happening on the web. And so what people are getting really excited about is the possibility of the Internet because of the way it's revolutionized communication to have that kind of impact on education as well. So, right now there's a huge movement for what's called open courseware. And open courseware is simply free textbooks, free lesson plans, and often lectures and audio and video that are all available online. There are thousands and thousands of courses you can find on iTunes, on YouTube, on sites like the Khan Academy. And these are really the raw material, the building blocks of learning. I mean, it doesn't constitute an actual class, but it's something that a motivated self-learner can use either to supplement their learning or to, pursue a subject on their own. And so the more we start to have these materials available online, the more people are going to look for models and ways to use those to have ultimately free education.
And for those people who are about to graduate high school, I know those people, they want to be like, oh, I want to go to this school, but I don't have the money. Is there a way where they don't have to spend a ridiculous amount to attend a four-year college? Is there a way for them to cut costs?
Well, I think the best way to cut costs is also the best thing you can do for your learning, and that is to do a lot of research for really on yourself. So, in the back part of my book, I have a resource guide, and I have a guide for students who want to, perform a little bit of introspection and check out those courses online. Before you choose a course of study or you choose a subject matter, you want to make sure that you thoroughly check it out and you really know what there is to know about what you can learn about, what it's really like to study that, and what the job market is for that. So the more preparation you have going into it, the more likely, number one, that you're going to complete a course of study, that you begin it. You're not going to quit because it's not what you wanted or because it's boring. And number two, that course of study is going to be ultimately relevant and lead you to the job that you want. So, to be prepared is really the number one advice I would give.
Anya, I was just thinking as you were saying that about especially the audience that we like to serve, which is people approaching midlife. Now, these are adults that have actually, in some cases, been to college. They decide they want to go back, but they seem to be a lot more astute about how they choose their coursework, how they spend their money. They're not just, in some ways going through the motion because the goal is getting that degree, but it's more specifically tailored to the direction that they want to go in their lives. Now, and reflecting about college back in my day, I remember that there were particular courses that I would want to take, and they were laden with these prerequisite classes.
Right.
And I would say, what does the relevance of this class have to do with me wanting to go in this direction? And I kind of wonder if that's what colleges do just to justify what their costs are sometimes. Like sort of saying, we're going to give you a bowl full of cereal, but to get the milk, you have to actually learn about how the carton is manufactured at the same time, and you think, well, wait a minute, I just want a bowl of cereal.
Well, I think what you're talking about is really the kind of objections that people have all the time to conventional learning, which is that the teachers and the structure of the school is making decisions for you that you want to make for yourself. And,
right.
And that's really why people get excited about open learning. If you go onto MIT's OpenCourseWare site today or the OpenCourseWare Consortium, there's on MIT said there's 1,900 courses in any subject you choose, and so if you want to watch a video or watch a lecture of a Nobel Prize winner talking about quantum physics, you don't have to ask for admission. You don't have to pay tuition. It's right there. So anybody's able to explore any topic that they find interesting.
Yeah, also just to go along with Dan, how are these changes relevant to people over 50, both as parents and learners, perhaps career changes?
Sure. So, I think that online learning, I think a lot of people say, is especially suited to older learners because they're more likely to have that kind of self-motivation that's really necessary for self-learning. So, a lot of people may find that they have, they feel that they have some technological barriers, but the software is getting easier to use all the time. So, I think that this is an incredible resource for older learners who might be using a career change and for parents as well because, to help their students really make an informed decision, it's really helpful to connect and to know about what your students are studying.
And also, what does this look like from the student's point of view and also the parent's point of view?
Sure. So, I think that the issues that we're talking about in higher education and that I talk about in my book, DIYU, everybody's experiencing this because everyone has this fear. They are paying so much to go to school. They're worried that it's not going to be relevant for them. The path to get to where they want to go isn't always clear. And for parents, obviously, they're worried about the cost as well. So, I think the changes that are going to come in higher education are going to come on all these dimensions. We need higher education to be more affordable. We need it to be more connected to the real needs that people have in society, and people need to be able to pursue the goals that they see fit.
I think, Anya, what's really interesting, too, is that our perception of what higher education has as value has to change within our own psychic perception. For instance, back in the day, in the growth of the Industrial Revolution, it was, of course, go to high school, graduate, go to college, get a degree. The next thing you know, get into a nice, stable, well-paying career, raise a family, and life is good for you. It's the middle-class American dream. And it seems we continued that same thought process out of an age that really is irrelevant, at least in the United States, meaning the industrial age, that is, where we've become more of a service society to where it almost seems college degrees, in many ways, seem almost irrelevant. And all we have now, as you wrote in your one book, Generation Debt, is that we're coming out, we find ourselves in debt looking for basic jobs. Like, in some cases, I even knew somebody with a degree that was trying to knock on the door of a McDonald's, and you think, what is going on? How can we change the way we think about what we think we're supposed to do?
Well, I think that you've really pinpointed the issue very much so, and that the change has to come in our thinking because, the fact is our society is not organized the way it used to be, and the things that are rewarded today are very different skills. What this economy rewards adaptability, it rewards the flexibility, the ability to take on new things and learn new ideas all the time, to switch from one context into another, to be able to be entrepreneurial and to, make your own business decisions. And often, you are your own bookkeeper, you are your own boss. And all these types of things are not things that you're going to learn necessarily by being a good, obedient student in a classical curriculum. A lot of what you have to learn really has to be done in the field, and you have to constantly be raising a hand and asking questions and making a nuisance of yourself if you really want to learn. And so, these are really techniques and skills more than they are content areas that people need to master. And a lot of it is stuff that, you can put into the category of old-fashioned street smarts in some ways.
Yeah, also, Anya, the book has gotten a lot of feedback. Are you surprised about the responses it has gotten?
Oh, gosh, that's a great question. I think that, people are excited about this future of DIYU learning. And I've been traveling all over the country and even overseas to talk to people about what they think about the future of learning. And I think that ultimately, although this is a really scary time of transition, that the future of it is really exciting because what we're talking about is a world without scarcity. Education from the time it started 1,000 years ago to now has really been about scarcity. It's who's going to get their hands on these books and who's going to be able to have time to sit face-to-face with professors. And this has been a very limited quality thing in society. But in the digital era, you can have one book and 1 million people can look at it at the same time. So you don't have the same scarcity issues. And living in a world of abundance, a real issue is really just to learn how to take advantage of that.
Yeah, maybe if I could just backtrack a little bit. I don't think I asked this question, but you argue for a movement called DIYU. What is it exactly?
Sure. So if I could define DIYU a little bit more clearly, what we're really talking about is learning that is centered. I use the word learning instead of education because education really has the emphasis on the teachers and on the structure, the institution. And DIYU learning is really putting the learner at the center. And so when you do that, you ask the question of how are you serving this person? What is this person's goals? And how can they pursue learning that comes out of their own interests, their own passions? And it's really turning the entire enterprise of learning on its head because when we think about education today, we think about standardized testing, we think about, putting in more data, more quality controls, and making everyone like everyone else. But the richness in our economy and the beauty in our society comes from people's individuality. And so that's what a DIYU learning future really tries to bring out.
Right. And, with the college tuition, being out of control and whatnot, would you think, is there another country we should be modeling our higher education after?
Well, that's a really interesting question. There's so many things going on with higher ed around the world. I don't know if you've heard recently that Britain is actually moving more towards our system, and that's caused huge riots because they've doubled, tripled, quadrupled, and quintupled their tuition in just a decade. And they're cutting subsidies very heavily to higher education. The fact is that there's no country around the world that's really exempt from these issues. There are countries that have a stronger legacy of subsidizing higher education, but they're still facing the same costs. And the ultimate outcome is that the subsidies are being cut because, it's really a huge investment of resources to try to educate 30-50% of your population. So, again, every society around the world is dealing with these issues one way or another.
Anya, because your book is so steeped with a lot of great resource material, I'm just kind of wondering if you've ever discovered if there is a general answer to this question. What has been the rationalization, if there is any, of why higher education has been able to rise at the rapid rate that it has? What has been their reasoning behind that? That's
a really great question. I actually had a really great time, researching the history of higher ed and figuring out exactly that answer. And I think, the real answer is that there's not just one rationalization, but higher education has been incredibly flexible in presenting itself as a solution to any number of problems as, America has continued on its history. So in the beginning, you had colleges representing sort of local sovereignty. So different ethnic groups, different religious groups, each one of them had to establish their own college in order to kind of put their mark on a place. And then later on, you had colleges as a center of industrial and agricultural development. So in the 19th century, we built these giant public land-grant universities, and they became centers of, training teachers, training farmers, training scientists and doctors, and really kind of pushing the whole industrial agenda of the United States. And then still later on in World War II, colleges grew massively through defense and research contracts. So, everything from the Manhattan Project to building, physics laboratories all over the place. So this was something that was tied very closely to national security. And so what you can see is that universities have been like cities, and they have a million different reasons for existing, and they can always make their case to whoever the powers are that be, that they should be existing and that they should be an important part of our society. And and the one group of people, if I can sound a little bit, that has been left out of this narrative is students. Students are the justification of the university, but you very rarely have a case of a bunch of students getting together and saying, we demand a university. It's really people putting together a university and then persuading, cajoling, or shaming the local kids to coming into that university.
Mm. Also, it- what uh, any solutions that are on the horizon, like as far as this, like maybe technology and how can that improve teaching and learning?
Yeah, so there's a couple different things that I talk about in the book. One of them is University of the People, and this is a free, nonprofit, tuition-free university with all open source courseware. So everything is, digital resources that people have made available online for free. And it's got students in 100 countries. It's got volunteer faculty, and they're operating really well and sort of showing that this can be done on a kind of massive scale. And another really interesting solution that I talk about is Western Governors University. Now they've been operating for about 15 years at this point, and they are a nonprofit public university in 17 Western states, but you can enroll from anywhere. They have students from all over the world, and they're really based on assessments. So, what they did was they got together groups of industry leaders and created a series of competency-based assessments. And to get a degree from that school, you don't have to sit in a classroom or do a certain number of hours of coursework. You just have to complete the assessment. If you complete the assessment successfully, you get credit for that course. And so you can pursue that learning goal in any way that you see fit, and you also have a personal mentor that you can work with. So this is a much lower cost model that it takes advantage of technology, but it's still very personalized, and it shows that idea of a personal learning path.
Yeah, also, another interesting thing I found is that you suggest that higher education will witness a further bundling of its services and activities. What would be some of the implications of the change for, maybe schools or teachers or students?
Sure, absolutely. So this unbundling idea, one great example is colleges might specialize in giving you assessment for prior learning. So let's say, you decide you want to study physics, you go and you look at the MIT stuff and you do this problem sets, then you need someone to evaluate you and give you credit and say that, yes, you did learn this. So a college could specialize in that. You could also see colleges or schools or really different kinds of programs that specialize in experiential learning. And they say, okay, we're going to give you the hands-on, you go get the content by yourself, and we're going to give you the hands-on experience that you need to really complement your learning, whether that's volunteer work somewhere or work in a laboratory or in a hospital or a school. So that's really interesting. So that's a lot more choice for the student to sort of piece together these different experiences and these different institutions into exactly the kinds of learning journey that they want to take.
Now, Anya, if you can, tell our listeners about some of the websites that you feature in your book and what they actually provide for people when it comes to a do-it-yourself university.
Sure. Well, I would suggest that people look on the Open Courseware Consortium site. It's ocwc.org, and the MIT Open Courseware site as well, just to get a feeling for the kinds of materials that are out there. There's iTunes U and there's YouTube.edu. If you're really new to, open learning resources online, I like to point people to TED Talks, because TED Talks are some of the most interesting and well-produced and really fascinating lectures that you can find anywhere, and they've got about 300 of them. And there's also an interesting community of people on there who go on and talk and give comments about the topics there. Khan Academy is a really great open courseware site. There's about 1,600 short videos on all kinds of topics, for everything math, science, physics. And, so those are some great sites to start with.
I think what's funny as I was reading in your chapter on economics is that you were talking about restore the concept of free. Now, I didn't know this, but it was actually true that there were colleges and universities that didn't charge any tuition at all, that you could just go.
Absolutely, and up until the 1970s.
Wow, really?
That was a common thing. Absolutely, yeah. And I know it sounds strange now, but people had, and that's also the case in many European countries as well, even today. Although they are facing pressures.
Because you think about, for instance, some of the areas that I find going to college necessary. You want to become a doctor, you want to become a lawyer, an engineer. You can see where it's necessary. But that's just, a handful of jobs right there when you think about it, or careers,
Sure.
if you will. But for the most part, when it comes to learning a lot of different things, it's all out there, and I'm thinking, how did they put the lock on the door to say you've got to pay to get this thing open to learn something that you could go out and find out for yourself at the library?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that's,
I mean, even in the movie Good Will Hunting, he talks about that. You can adopt, that you paid $100,000 for and dropped $1.50 for late charges in the public library. And he's
yep.
right.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think that dream is getting closer and closer to a lot of people, and a lot of people are asking that question and saying, it's a major, major question to ask because, it's really questioning authority and who has more authority, who's more expert than our professors. We have sort of the definition of expert as someone who has a PhD. So, they really have managed to pull a fast one on us, but I think those times are getting shorter.
I know, Anya, years ago I actually did an interview with a young physicist who's actually believed to step beyond Einstein. And he was a Brazilian of about the age of 32, and he wrote a book, Faster Than the Speed of Light. And one of the things that I found phenomenal about the time during where I was doing a series of interviews especially, it wasn't really about education, but it started coming to light, is how far behind universities and colleges are about moving ahead.
Right.
That it's just not something you really do, especially if you esteem your job. It's just staying with the status quo. And I find that when it comes to higher education, that our public perception seems to stay in tune with those people that would rather just hold things back and make you believe that it's necessary, no matter how much we increase this, for you to keep doing this. And isn't the definition of insanity doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result?
Certainly is. Certainly is. Yeah. I think another kind of interesting way of looking at this is you think about, the opposite of education is ignorance, right?
That's a fact, too. That'll cost a lot more money.
Yeah, well, ignorance is a lot more expensive, but then you start to think about, well, what is the definition of ignorance? And there's some great anthropology work talking about this and asking the question, what about societies before there were formal schools? I mean, how did people learn the knowledge that they needed to function in those societies? And, maybe they were more primitive societies, the types of things you had to learn were more informal, but, you're talking about societies that, fed and clothed themselves and made everything that they needed to live, and often had very, even agriculture and very complex rules. And these things were transmitted in very different ways. And so we kind of have to, there's almost like a looking back to look ahead aspect to this, where we start to ask, how does the whole community become like a school? How does the whole community teach and give young people the knowledge that they need to participate?
Yeah, also, Anya, another interesting quote I found in your book is about how the student has to fill out all this information that reveals their financial status, and the institution doesn't have to reveal their financial status or what they're going to use the money for. Is that a little concerning at all?
Sure. So, I think there's a lot of questions that come to light in the way that higher education is financed. And one of the biggest areas of concern right now is in the for-profit sector of higher ed, because that's growing very, very quickly. You've got colleges enrolling students at 5 to 10 times the rate of public and private schools. And many of these institutions, most of their money comes from the federal student aid programs, both loans and Pell Grants. They don't get a lot of funding from anywhere else. And a lot of the students that they sign up don't end up getting much benefit out of it, because they don't do a lot of advanced work to figure out if the students can actually benefit. And often the resources that they offer are very, very meager and small. So one rule that they're trying to put in that's currently on offer in Congress is to say that if 2/3 of your students, when they come out, if they're defaulting on their loans, if they're not able to pay it back, that a for-profit college would lose its standing and no longer be able to operate. And 2/3 sounds like a lot, but the fact is that you've got colleges out there operating right now, these for-profit schools, that have even more than that. They have 80% of their students going out the door and not really succeeding at anything. So
wow.
This is a major issue. Yeah.
Yeah, I bet it would be, especially when you drop, a good few grand on something. And like I said earlier today, or earlier in the program, and you're out trying to get a job at McDonald's just because you need to get your student loans paid. I think something's missing here.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's been attempts by some students, some graduates, to actually sue their colleges for basically breach of contract.
They should.
Yeah.
Not all of them, but some of them really should be. Especially the kind of food they serve for the tuition that you're...
Right.
Now, here's the big thing, too, though. This is a two-sided coin. It isn't just the universities and colleges that get out of hand with tuition, but it's also a person's thinking about why they're going in the first place. I'm a big proponent, I'm telling you. College is a great place, for exploring yourself and learning, but it's expensive if that's all you're trying to do is discover who you are. And with all the resources that are out there that you can actually do that on your own, that I think would be the first step. I decided myself before even going to college is that I was going to take some time off. I figured after 12 years of school, I've had enough. I just want a break. And I know in your book you talk about Paul Schaefer, who's the band leader in The Late Show with David Letterman, is that he actually said that very same thing. Let me take a year off and let me just figure things out, what I want to do, and then go from there. And I think that is so important because really, I had this experience once, Anya, where I was at a college counselor, and they love when you go in there and you really don't know what it is you want to do. You're hooked then.
Right. No, it's really, really true. And I actually, there was a story in the Wall Street Journal yesterday that said that more students are electing to take a year off, whether to work and earn some money or to travel or volunteer. And I think that's a wonderful idea because it, above all, it introduces the idea that learning is not something that happens just in the classroom. It's something that you have to be in charge of as an individual. And if you don't feel ready to do that right out of high school, then it's time to take some time and really think about what it is that you do want to do.
Well, also, another thing I liked about this book is at the end you mentioned there's a line that basically says, we have less than 10 years to reinvent the way we make energy, and all of this rooted in education. I just thought that was really interesting.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I think all this stuff about education really comes into a much broader context, which is that the purpose of education is to transmit our culture, and it's also to allow our culture to persist and to innovate and continue. And, if we're hobbling ourselves with education that does not move at the speed of science and at the speed of technology and the speed of life, really, then, we're not going to be able to meet these challenges in the 21st century that we're all facing.
I know it's interesting, Anya, when you talk about formal education. I'm going to take it to a real basic level and get away from colleges and universities, and that's all these pop colleges that you tend to see on TV in schools. And there was one particular point, and this is my personal experience, I'll tell you, I kid you not, okay. Bartending school. Okay. Right. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, now who taught bartenders how to mix drinks before bartending schools, right?
Right.
So here's what's really, really interesting. I actually went on a job interview, and I was an experienced bartender. And the manager was very adamant, are you sure you haven't been to any bartending school whatsoever? I said, yeah. I really had to sell them. No, I haven't been to one. They said, okay, we'd like to go ahead and give you a shot. Apparently, they had hired one or two of these people, and I've heard this very consistently. They don't make very good bartenders when they come out of these schools, and I'm thinking they're dropping $1,200, and they're not really, able to do what they're supposed to do. And I wonder how many other types of careers people are misled into spending money to be educated to go do, and they become less than reasonable once they're in there doing it.
Well, I think that's a really, really interesting case study, and I'll probably repeat that if you don't mind.
You're going to write that book for me, and I'm going to interview you when the time comes.
Sure thing, because I think, another example of that on a much bigger scale is that a lot of studies show that to get a master's degree in the liberal arts actually pushes your income down over what it would be for an average bachelor's degree. So,
oh, my goodness.
It's something where it really is an unintended consequence because, you're spending that time out of the job market and the skills that you come out with aren't necessarily applicable anywhere. So, I think but the sort of fundamental point of the bartending idea is that, education is not the same as experience, and the more education is sort of divorced from the world of experience, the less relevant and helpful it's going to be for you.
Mm-hmm. What's been the most fun about putting this book together, Do-It-Yourself University, for you, Anya?
Well, the most fun part around DIYU is really finding the community of people that are out there that are really committed to changing education. And there are teachers and professors, there are students, there are independent scholars, and just people who love learning and love technology and want to empower people to teach and learn with each other. So I was in Barcelona this fall at the Mozilla Festival for Learning Freedom in the Web, and you had hackers there building robots, and you had teachers and professors and talking about open content and people from the Obama administration, and it was just an amazing feeling because we all feel that yes, this is a really big challenge, but at the same time, we've got tools to change it up and to learn and to be creative. And so I think it's a really exciting time, and things are changing really fast.
And not to put any particular administration on a pedestal, but of the administrations in your experience, presidential I'm talking about, who do you think has been the most effective, and what has been their effect on higher education, both in cost and in value to what the students are getting?
Well, I was speaking recently with an Obama appointee, and of course he's going to have a certain point of view on this, but he was in the higher education world for many years before he got into politics, and he really thinks that the kinds of work that Obama's doing with open educational resources and content are going to be among the biggest legacies of his entire administration, because what we're really talking about is unlocking the doors of knowledge and allowing people from around the world to participate and connect. And this is something that America is uniquely equipped to do. We have the resources, we have the ability, and it benefits everyone in the world. So, I think that's really going to be a massive change that we're going to see coming over the next years. Now, the challenge that remains in front of us is to help figure out how to use those resources. How do you get a lesson plan from a university in the Midwest and get people in Cairo to adopt it and to translate it and to figure out how to use it? That's really the issues that we're looking at now. But, the opportunities are really massive.
Oh, right on. Devin, any final thoughts on this?
I thought this was really interesting. I can relate to this because I'm going through this. I'm in college. I'm spending all this ridiculous money just to attend college and get my degree. So, I thought this was a book I can relate to, and I enjoyed reading it.
Thanks, I appreciate that. I hope you'll tell your friends about it.
Now, go ahead. I'm sorry, Devin.
Oh no. That's it for me.
Okay. Anya, if you can, could you give out a website so people can find out more about this?
Sure. I hope that everyone will go to DIYUbook.com.
Anya Kamenetz, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program. Great resources in your book, and, there's so much in here that I really agree with. The first step, quit listening sometimes to your parents and well-meaning loved ones and friends. Find out who you are before you take that expensive step that leads you through the front door of a McDonald's after 4 years. And thank you for joining us here on the program.
Thanks for having me. Happy New Year.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there. Again, self-discovery is the best step before dropping a check. That's right. Do-It-Yourself University is the title of the book, and our guest today, Anya Kamenetz. We encourage you to also visit us at our website, which is beyond50radio.com, the number 50. Join us and sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter as well. I'm Daniel Davis, along with Devin Dakota. Thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.